A girl faces rain, cold, and pain, carrying not just a box in her hands, but the weight of an impossible mission. Within those pages, protected by plastic bags, lies the chance to rewrite a story. On the other side, a powerful man lives surrounded by wealth and a past he could never bury. And when he reads those pages, he realizes there is still time to turn pain into love. If you love great stories, please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're from. Let's continue. The rain fell in sheets across Seattle's upscale Magnolia neighborhood, transforming the manicured streets into glistening rivers. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the small figure of a girl trudging through the downpour. 9-year-old Lily Parker clutched a cardboard box against her chest, protected by layers of plastic bags taped meticulously around its edges. Her sneakers were soaked through, her socks squelching with each determined step, but her eyes remained fixed on the massive iron gates ahead. Behind those gates stood Evergreen Manor, a sprawling mansion that seemed to occupy its own separate reality from the rest of the city. Its windows glowed with warm light, a sharp contrast to the cold rain pelting Lily's thin shoulders. The property belonged to Richard Caldwell, founder and CEO of Cascade Technologies, one of the most influential tech companies on the West Coast. His name graced buildings, charity foundations, and business magazines, but to Lily, he was simply the man she needed to find. She approached the intercom at the gate, standing on tiptoes to reach the button. A harsh voice crackled through the speaker. "No soliciting, please vacate the premises immediately." "I need to see Mr. Caldwell," Lily said, her voice small but firm against the thundering rain. "It's important." "Mr. Caldwell doesn't take unscheduled visitors, especially not—" The voice paused, and Lily could feel the unspoken judgment. "Children, please leave before we contact authorities." Lily stepped back, shoulders slumping. This was her third attempt this week. Each time she'd been turned away, her mission unfulfilled. But the promise she'd made burned brighter than her discouragement. She retreated to the shelter of a nearby oak tree, watching the gates, determined to find another way. Inside Evergreen Manor, Richard Caldwell stood at his office window, watching rain cascade down the glass. At 62, he cut an imposing figure. Silver-streaked dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a permanently stern expression carved by decades of high-stakes business decisions. The Seattle Times had once described him as a man who has everything money can buy and nothing it cannot. Richard turned away from the window and surveyed his office. Awards lined the walls, photographs documented handshakes with presidents and tech pioneers, and a single empty frame sat on his desk, face down. He never allowed the housekeeping staff to remove it. "Mr. Caldwell?" His assistant, Nancy Wheeler, appeared at the doorway. "Your 4 o'clock cancelled due to the storm. Would you like me to reschedule for tomorrow?" Richard waved a dismissive, "And tomorrow's fine. Anything else?" Nancy hesitated. "Security mentioned there's a young girl at the gate again, the same one from earlier this week." Something flickered across Richard's face. Curiosity, perhaps, or annoyance. "What does she want?" "She says she needs to speak with you. She's carrying some kind of package. Probably selling something for a school fundraiser," Richard muttered. "Tell security to send her away, politely," he added as an afterthought. As Nancy left, Richard returned to the window. Through the rain-blurred glass, he could make out a small figure standing beneath a tree across the street. Something about her stubborn stance, refusing to be deterred by the weather or rejection, triggered a memory he'd spent 15 years trying to bury. Another rainy day. Another figure walking away from these gates, but that time it had been someone leaving, not trying to enter. His daughter, Amanda, carrying a small suitcase, her back straight with pride, even as he knew her heart was breaking. The last time he'd seen her. Richard turned abruptly from the window and poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter on his desk. He didn't need reminders of that day. His decision had been justified, necessary. He had a reputation to uphold, a company to run. What Amanda had done, or what he believed she had done, was unforgivable. The scandal would have destroyed everything he'd built. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Caldwell, your car is ready whenever you'd like to leave." "I'll be down in 10 minutes, he replied. In his closet, Richard selected an umbrella and overcoat. The fundraising gala at the Seattle Art Museum would be filled with the usual crowd: business associates, potential investors, and society figures eager to be seen in proximity to wealth and influence. Another evening of shallow conversations and strategic networking. Another night of returning to an empty house haunted by silence. As he descended the grand staircase, Mrs. Patel, his housekeeper for the past 20 years, was arranging fresh flowers in the foyer. "Will you be late tonight, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked. "The usual time. Don't wait up." Mrs. Patel nodded, but her eyes held a familiar sadness. She had been here during the good years, when Amanda's laughter had filled these hallways. She alone had witnessed Richard's transformation from a devoted father to the cold, isolated man he'd become. "The storm is getting worse," she commented. "Perhaps you should consider staying home tonight." Richard checked his watch. "The museum is only 20 minutes away. I'll be fine." Outside, his driver, Michael, waited with an umbrella. The rain had indeed intensified, drumming against the pavement with renewed fury. As Richard settled into the back seat of his Bentley, his phone buzzed with an email notification. Another acquisition offer for one of Cascade's subsidiaries. Business never stopped, and he preferred it that way. Work filled the void where family should have been. The car pulled away from the mansion, heading toward the gates. As they swung open, Richard glanced absently out the window and froze. The little girl was there, directly in their path, her clothes soaked through, her face set with determination. Before Michael could fully stop, she darted forward. "Sir, I'm sorry," Michael began, but Richard held up a hand, his attention fixed on what had just happened. With surprising agility, the girl had managed to toss something through the partially open window of the back seat. A small box wrapped in plastic now sat beside Richard on the leather upholstery. "Stop the car," Richard commanded, his voice tight. Michael pulled over just outside the gates. Richard stared at the package, a strange sense of foreboding washing over him. Through the window, he could see security personnel running toward the girl, who made no attempt to flee. She simply stood there, rain streaming down her face, watching the car with an intensity that unnerved him. Richard's hand hovered over the box. For 15 years, he had built walls around his life, controlling every aspect of his environment. This small, soggy package represented something unpredictable, uninvited. He could simply tell Michael to dispose of it, to continue to the gala as if nothing had happened. Instead, he found himself reaching for it, his fingers closing around the plastic-wrapped cardboard. Whatever this child was so determined to deliver, whatever had brought her repeatedly to his gate in this punishing weather, he suddenly needed to know. The security guards had reached the girl now. Through the rain-streaked window, Richard could see them speaking to her, their postures suggesting irritation mixed with concern. "Sir," Michael's voice broke through his thoughts. "Should we continue to the museum?" Richard looked down at the box in his hands, then back at the small, defiant figure in the rain. "No," he said quietly. "I think there's been a change of plans." 15 years earlier, Amanda Caldwell had been the pride of her father's life, though Richard rarely expressed it in words. A brilliant student with her father's determination and her late mother's compassion, she was finishing her first year at Stanford with a double major in computer science and international relations. Richard had envisioned her eventually taking over Cascade Technologies, building on the empire he had created. The spring break before everything fell apart had been unusually sunny for Seattle. Amanda had come home from college, bringing with her new ideas and perspectives that both fascinated and slightly alarmed her father. "Dad, technology isn't just about profit margins," she'd argued during dinner on the terrace, her long chestnut hair catching the sunset light. "It's about improving lives, creating access, breaking down barriers." Richard had smiled indulgently. "Profit enables all those noble pursuits, Amanda. Without it, the most altruistic ideas remain just that, ideas." "But what if we prioritized social impact from the beginning, built it into our business model instead of treating it as an afterthought?" These spirited debates had been the highlight of Richard's days. Even when they disagreed, he admired her conviction, her unwillingness to accept the status quo simply because it existed. In many ways, she reminded him of himself at her age, before success, before wealth, when idealism still outweighed pragmatism. That particular evening, as they'd walked through the garden his late wife had designed, Amanda had shared her summer plans, an internship with a non-profit focused on bringing technology education to underserved communities. "It's not the prestigious corporate internship you probably had in mind," she'd said, watching his reaction carefully. "But I think it's important work." Richard had surprised her by placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud," he'd said simply. It was the highest compliment he could offer, and Amanda's eyes had welled with tears. Elizabeth Caldwell had passed, when Amanda was just 12, leaving a void neither father nor daughter had fully learned to fill. In many ways, their shared grief had become the strongest bond between them, unspoken but ever present. Now, sitting in his car outside the gates of Evergreen Manor with a mysterious box in his hands, Richard was haunted by how quickly that bond had shattered in the weeks following that peaceful spring evening. The memories came in painful flashes. Amanda, returning unexpectedly from Stanford, mid-semester, her uncharacteristic silence, the shadows beneath her eyes. His mounting concern turning to suspicion when he overheard a phone conversation that seemed to confirm his worst fears. His daughter involved with someone unsuitable, making choices that could jeopardize everything. The argument that followed remained seared in his memory. His accusations, her tearful attempts to explain, his refusal to listen. He'd been convinced she was throwing away her future for a relationship his business associates would consider scandalous. The potential headlines, the whispers at board meetings, the damage to the carefully cultivated Caldwell image, these had consumed his thoughts more than his daughter's obvious distress. "You'll thank me someday," he'd told her coldly after. Delivering his ultimatum, end the relationship or lose her place in his home and company. Amanda's response had been quiet but firm. "If you knew what really happened, if you would just listen, you wouldn't be saying these things." But Richard hadn't listened. Pride and fear had clouded his judgment, hardened his heart. When Amanda had walked out 2 days later, he'd convinced himself it was temporary, that she would come to her senses once she realized how difficult life would be without his support. Days had turned to weeks, weeks to months, and eventually, Richard had buried himself in work, expanding Cascade Technologies into new markets, accumulating more wealth, more accolades, more of everything except what truly mattered. There had been moments of weakness, late nights when he'd found himself searching for her name online, calling Stanford only to learn she'd withdrawn from the university, hiring private investigators who always seemed to lose her trail. But with each passing year, his pride had built higher walls, making reconciliation seem increasingly impossible. "Sir?" Michael's voice pulled Richard back to the present. Rain continued to pound the car roof, creating a cocoon of white noise around them. Richard cleared his throat. "Bring the girl inside." Michael's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded and stepped out with an umbrella, approaching the security guards and the small figure between them. Richard watched through the window as Michael spoke to the guards, who looked surprised at whatever instructions he was delivering. The girl, however, showed no reaction beyond a slight straightening of her shoulders. She seemed far too composed for someone her age, especially one standing drenched in a storm. As Michael escorted her toward the car, Richard found himself strangely nervous. Who was this child? What could she possibly want from him? And why did she remind him so powerfully of Amanda at that age? The same determined set of the jaw, the same fearlessness in the face of authority. The back door opened, and the girl slid into the seat beside him, water dripping from her clothes onto the expensive leather. She didn't seem intimidated by his presence or impressed by the luxury surrounding her. Instead, she regarded him with clear, direct eyes that held a maturity beyond her years. "My name is Lily Parker," she said before he could speak, "and I need you to open that box." Richard studied her face. "Do your parents know you're here?" "Lily Parker." A shadow crossed her features. "I live with my grandmother. She knows I'm doing something important, but not exactly what. And what is so important that you've come to my gate 3 times in a pouring rain? Lily's gaze shifted to the plastic-wrapped box in his hands. Someone needed me to deliver that. To you. Someone who can't come herself. A cold feeling settled in Richard's stomach. Who? Open it, Lily said simply. Please. Richard hesitated, then carefully began to remove the layers of plastic protecting the cardboard. Despite the rain, the box itself was remarkably dry inside its waterproof cocoon. As he lifted the lid, he found a sealed envelope resting atop, a stack of papers and photographs. The envelope bore a single word in handwriting he recognized instantly, Dad. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up, the familiar script sending a shock through his system. Amanda. After 15 years of silence, his daughter had reached out through this strange child messenger. How do you know Amanda? He asked, his voice hoarse. Lily's expression remained carefully neutral. I met her at Mercy Hospital, where I volunteer after school. Hospital? Richard felt his chest tighten. Is she ill? The letter will explain everything, Lily said, her voice softening slightly. She wrote it for you last week. She wasn't sure you'd... I want to read it, but I promised her I'd try. Richard stared at the envelope, suddenly afraid of its contents. 15 years of silence, and now this cryptic message delivered by a child in a storm. What could Amanda possibly have to say that couldn't be said in person? Unless he tore open the envelope with unsteady fingers and unfolded the pages within. The first words caused his vision to blur. Dear Dad, by the time you read this, I may already be gone. In a small apartment across town, Emma Wilson, formerly Amanda Caldwell, lay propped against pillows in a bed that had become both sanctuary and prison. The rain tapped gently against the window, nature's persistent reminder of time continuing its relentless march. At 35, she looked much older, her once vibrant features hollowed by illness, her chestnut hair now dull and thin. Stage 4 lymphoma had ravaged her body over the past 8 months, advancing with frightening speed despite aggressive treatments. Mum? Tyler stood in the doorway, his lanky 14-year-old frame seeming too small for the burden his eyes carried. I made some tea, the kind the nurse said might help. Emma smiled, the expression transforming her face momentarily back to the woman she had been before illness claimed its territory. Thank you, sweetheart. Have you taken your medication? Tyler nodded, placing the steaming mug on her bedside. Table. He moved with careful deliberation, each motion measured as if to conserve energy. The hereditary kidney disorder that had begun manifesting when he was 12 had progressed significantly in recent months. Without the specialized treatment, they couldn't afford. His prognosis was increasingly grim. Any word from Lily? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Tyler shook his head. Not yet, but it's raining pretty hard. Maybe she's just waiting it out somewhere. They both knew that was unlikely. Little Lily Parker, with her fierce determination and seemingly limitless courage, wasn't one to be deterred by weather. If she hadn't returned yet, it was because her mission remained incomplete. Emma sipped the tea, the warm liquid soothing her raw throat. She wondered, not for the first time, if sending the letter had been a mistake. Pride had kept her from reaching out to her father for 15 long years. Pride and a deep, abiding hurt that had never fully healed. Even now, with her health failing and Tyler's condition worsening, making that first contact had felt like surrendering a battle she'd been fighting her entire adult life. Their modest apartment told the story of that battle, a life cobbled together through sheer determination. Certificates on the wall documented Emma's journey from college dropout to registered nurse. Photographs chronicled Tyler's childhood, always just the two of them. At parks, school events, birthday celebrations, a bookshelf overflowed with medical texts and science fiction novels, Tyler's twin passions. Everything was clean but worn, cared for but modest. There had been good years, especially when Emma had secured a position at Mercy Hospital. The steady income had allowed them small luxuries, Tyler's computer, weekend trips to the coast, occasional dinners out. They had built a life that, while challenging, had been rich with love and resilience. Until 8 months ago, when persistent fatigue and unexplained bruising had led to a diagnosis that shattered their carefully constructed world. Emma had tried to continue working through her treatments, but as the disease progressed, even the simplest tasks had become monumental challenges. Medical leave had turned into resignation, savings had dwindled, and insurance covered only a fraction of the mounting costs. Tyler's condition, manageable with medication in its early stages, had begun to deteriorate just as Emma's health failed. The cruel coincidence had seemed like fate's final joke, mother and son facing medical crises simultaneously, with resources stretched beyond breaking. It was Lily who had changed everything. The 9-year-old volunteer from the pediatric floor had taken a special interest in Tyler during his hospital stays, reading to him when fatigue overwhelmed him, keeping him company during dialysis sessions. Her grandmother, Maria Parker, cleaned the hospital overnight, bringing Lily with her when childcare arrangements fell through. Despite her young age, Lily possessed an old soul's wisdom and perception. She had noticed the small photo Emma kept, the only one she'd preserved from her previous life, showing a younger Richard Caldwell teaching his teenage daughter to sail on Lake Washington. "Is that your dad?" Lily had asked one evening while Emma was particularly weak from her latest treatment. "Yes," Emma had admitted after a moment's hesitation. "Do you miss him?" The simple question had pierced Emma's defenses. "Every day," she'd whispered, surprising herself with the admission. With childlike directness, Lily had asked why they didn't see each other anymore. The story had emerged slowly, painfully, the misunderstanding that had led to estrangement, the pride on both sides that had maintained it, the 15 years of silence neither had found the courage to break. "But he's your dad," Lily had said, with the uncomplicated logic of childhood. "And you're sick, and Tyler needs help, he should know." Emma had explained it wasn't that simple, that her father believed terrible things about her, that too much time had passed, that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. But Lily had been persistent. "My grandma says it's never too late to tell the truth." Those words had echoed in Emma's mind as her condition worsened, as medical options narrowed, as Tyler's specialist delivered increasingly dire prognoses about his kidney function. In the quiet hours of sleepless nights, Emma had finally confronted the possibility that her pride might cost her son the future he deserved. The letter had taken days to write, attempts abandoned, pages crumpled, emotions overwhelming her limited physical strength. How to explain 15 years in a few paragraphs? How to tell her father that the scandal he'd feared had actually been a violent assault by a teaching assistant she'd trusted? That her attempts to press charges had been thwarted by the man's powerful family connections? That the pregnancy, resulting from that trauma, had given her Tyler the greatest blessing of her life? And how to ask for help without it seeming like the only reason she was reaching out was financial desperation? Because despite everything, despite the years of hurt and abandonment, Emma wanted her father to know her son, wanted Tyler to know his grandfather, wanted, in whatever time she had left, to heal the wound that had shaped all their lives. "Mom?" Tyler's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "You should rest. You're pushing yourself too hard." Emma reached for his hand, noting how thin his wrists had become. "I'm just thinking, sweetheart. About the letter, about him." Tyler rarely mentioned his grandfather directly, as if saying the name might conjure the man who had never acknowledged his existence. "Yes," Emma admitted. "I keep wondering if I should have gone myself, or if I should have left it alone entirely." Tyler sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "You've always told me that truth matters, that hiding from it doesn't make it go away." Emma felt tears threatening. Her son, wise beyond his years, throwing her own lessons back at her. "When did you get so smart? I had a good teacher." His smile flickered briefly before concern shadowed his features again. "Do you really think he'll come, after all this time?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Emma had asked herself the same thing repeatedly, since entrusting the letter to Lily's determined hands. Would Richard Caldwell, after 15 years of self-imposed separation, even read the words she'd written? And if he did, Would they penetrate the walls of judgment and hurt that had kept them apart? I don't know, she answered honestly, but for the first time in a very long while, I hope he will. A sound at the front door interrupted them, the unmistakable scrape of a key in the lock. They both tensed, listening as the door opened and closed. "Emma? Tyler?" Maria Parker's accented voice called out. "Are you awake? Someone is here." Emma's eyes met Tyler's, a silent current of anticipation passing between them. Then they heard it, the heavy tread of unfamiliar footsteps following Maria's lighter ones down the hallway toward the bedroom. Emma straightened against her pillows, a sudden surge of adrenaline temporarily masking her weakness. Tyler stood, moving protectively closer to his mother's side. Together they watched the doorway, waiting for whoever was about to enter. The footsteps stopped. There was a moment of absolute silence, broken only by the persistent rhythm of rain against the windows. Then a figure appeared in the doorway, tall, silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes that immediately found Emma's. "Amanda," Richard Caldwell said, his voice breaking on the name he hadn't spoken aloud in 15 years. 3 days earlier, Lily Parker had made a promise that seemed simple in theory, but daunting in execution. She sat cross-legged on the edge of Emma's hospital bed, watching as the woman carefully sealed the envelope containing the letter she'd spent days writing. "Are you sure about this, Lily?" Emma asked, her voice weak, but her eyes searching the girl's face for any sign of hesitation. "It's a lot to ask of anyone, especially someone your age." Lily straightened her shoulders. "I can do it. I know where his house is. Everybody in Seattle knows Evergreen Manor. And I'm good at getting into places." This last part was said with a hint of pride that made Emma smile despite her concerns. "It's not about getting in, sweetheart. It's about—" Emma paused, searching for words a 9-year-old might understand. "My father is a complicated man. He's very important and very busy. He has people who keep others away from him." "You mean like guards?" "Security personnel, assistants, a whole system designed to filter who gets access to him." Emma tucked the envelope into the box along with the other contents, medical records, photographs, newspaper clippings, and a small blue notebook she'd kept during her pregnancy. He might not want to receive this at all, especially from someone he doesn't know. Lily considered this information with the serious concentration she applied to all problems. "Then I'll have to be extra clever and persistent." "Persistent is definitely something you excel at," Emma acknowledged with a small laugh that turned into a cough. When she recovered, she reached for Lily's hand. "But I want you to promise me something else. If it becomes too difficult, or if anyone threatens to call the authorities, you'll stop trying. Your grandmother can't afford that kind of trouble." "I won't get caught," Lily said with absolute conviction. "Promise me," Emma insisted. Lily sighed dramatically. "Fine, I promise, but I won't fail. Tyler needs that special medicine, and you need—" She trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Emma squeezed her hand. "I know, but some things are beyond even the most determined 9-year-old's control." As Lily carefully placed the box into her backpack, Emma studied the girl who had become such an unexpected blessing in their lives. Lily had appeared in the pediatric ward 6 months ago, trailing behind her grandmother, Maria, who had recently taken a night custodial position at Mercy Hospital. While Maria cleaned, Lily had been given permission to read to patients who were awake during her grandmother's shift. Tyler, struggling with the initial diagnosis of his kidney disorder, had been Lily's first regular client. Something about her matter-of-fact approach to illness, her refusal to treat him as fragile or different, had drawn him out of the depression that had followed his diagnosis. When Emma's own health had begun to deteriorate, Lily had extended her care to include them both, bringing small gifts, smuggling in homemade food that tasted better than hospital fare, and offering a brightness that cut through the clinical gloom. Now, as Emma's condition worsened and Tyler's treatment options narrowed, Lily had appointed herself their champion, determined to deliver the letter Emma had never found the courage to send. "Remember," Emma said as Lily zipped her backpack closed, "even if you succeed in getting this to him, he might not respond. He might not come. I need you to be prepared for that possibility." Lily's expression was solemn but determined. "He'll come. He has to." The certainty in her voice almost made Emma believe it herself. That had been 3 days ago. Since then, Lily had made 2 unsuccessful attempts to reach Richard Caldwell. The first time she'd been turned away politely but firmly at the gate. The second, when she'd tried to climb over a section of wall at the property's edge, security had escorted her off the grounds with a warning that trespassing was a serious offense. But Lily Parker wasn't easily deterred. Her entire life had been shaped by persistence in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Born to a mother who disappeared shortly after her birth and a father she'd never known, Lily had been raised by her grandmother Maria in a small apartment in one of Seattle's less affluent neighborhoods. They got by on Maria's cleaning jobs and occasional seamstress work, living month to month with little margin for error. Despite their financial constraints, Maria had instilled in her granddaughter a fierce sense of dignity and determination. "We may not have much," she often said, "but we have pride in who we are and what we do." What they did more often than not was help others. Maria regularly shared their limited resources with neighbors in need, offering childcare, meals, or simply a sympathetic ear. Lily had grown up watching her grandmother extend herself for others without expectation of return. It was a natural extension of these lessons that Lily now found herself on a mission to help Tyler and Emma, regardless of the challenges. The morning of her 3rd attempt dawned with a violent thunderstorm that showed no signs of abating. Maria, preparing to leave for her day job cleaning offices downtown, frowned as Lily packed her raincoat and boots. "Where are you going in this weather, Nina?" she asked, her accent thickening with concern. "Just to the library," Lily lied, avoiding her grandmother's perceptive gaze. "I have a project due." Maria seemed skeptical, but nodded slowly. "Be careful. The streets will be flooding in this rain." "I will," Lily promised, guilt twisting in her stomach. She hated lying to her grandmother, but she couldn't risk Maria forbidding the mission. Too much was at stake. After Maria left, Lily carefully wrapped Emma's box in layers of plastic bags, sealing each layer with tape to create a waterproof shell. She placed it in her backpack, added a change of clothes and a small umbrella, then set out into the storm. The bus ride to Magnolia took nearly an hour, with delays caused by flooded intersections and traffic accidents. By the time Lily reached the stop nearest to Evergreen Manor, the rain had intensified, drumming against her hooded raincoat with punishing force. Lightning split the sky at regular intervals, followed by thunderclaps that she felt in her chest. Most children would have been frightened by the storm, but Lily found it oddly appropriate. The dramatic weather suited the importance of her mission. If delivering this box could save Tyler and help Emma, a little rain was nothing to fear. As she approached Evergreen Manor for the 3rd time, Lily abandoned her previous strategies. Direct approaches had failed. It was time for something less conventional. She positioned herself across the street, sheltering under a large oak tree, and watched the property. Security cameras swept the perimeter, guards made regular rounds, and the iron gates remained firmly closed. For hours, she observed, cold and wet but unwavering. She noticed patterns, the changing of security shifts, the deliveries that came, at regular intervals, the moments when the gates opened automatically to admit vehicles. She watched as staff arrived and departed, noting which ones received more deferential treatment from the guards. As afternoon faded toward evening, Lily spotted an opportunity. A sleek black Bentley emerged from the garage, making its way toward the main gate. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she could make out the profile of a silver-haired man in the back seat, Richard Caldwell himself, leaving the property. This was her chance. Summoning all her courage, Lily darted from her hiding place and positioned herself near the gate. As the car slowed for the security checkpoint, she calculated her timing carefully. The moment the gates began to swing open and the car started to pull forward, she made her move. Sprinting through the rain, heart pounding in her ears, Lily reached the vehicle just as it cleared the gates. She noticed the back window was partially lowered. Perhaps Caldwell had been speaking to the security guard. Without hesitation, she thrust the plastic-wrapped box through the opening, where it landed on the seat beside the startled billionaire. She hadn't expected the car to stop. In her hastily formulated plan, the vehicle would continue on its way, giving her time to disappear before anyone realized what had happened. Instead, the Bentley pulled to an immediate halt and security personnel began running toward her. Lily stood her ground, rain streaming down her face. She had delivered the box, completed the mission Emma had entrusted to her. Whatever happened next, she had kept her promise. To her surprise, the rear door of the Bentley opened and a man stepped out with an umbrella. Not Richard Caldwell, but his driver. The man approached her with a bemused expression. "Miss," he said, "Mr. Caldwell would like to speak with you." Lily blinked rainwater from her eyes, uncertain she'd heard correctly. "He wants to talk to me." The driver nodded, extending the umbrella to shelter her. "He's asking you to join him in the car." The security guards reached them, looking to the driver for instructions. He waved them off with a brief explanation, then guided Lily toward the waiting vehicle. As she slid into the luxurious interior of the Bentley, Lily found herself face to face with Richard Caldwell. He was older than in the photographs Emma had shown her, his hair more silver than dark, lines etched more deeply around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes, piercing blue, intelligent, and currently fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race, were exactly as Emma had described them. He held the box in his hands, studying it as if it might contain explosives rather than papers and photographs. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled but tight with emotion. "My name is Lily Parker," she said before he could speak, "and I need you to open that box." Richard stared at the pages in his hands, the world around him fading as his daughter's words pulled him into a reality he'd never allowed himself to consider. Rain pounded the roof of the car, creating a private universe where only the letter and its revelations existed. "Dear Dad," it began, "by the time you read this, I may already be gone from the hospital, not because I've recovered, but because the treatments are no longer effective and I've chosen to spend whatever time remains in the comfort of home with my son. Yes, Dad, you have a grandson. His name is Tyler, and he's 14 years old. He has your eyes and your analytical mind. He loves astronomy and computer programming. He plays chess and can solve complex math problems in his head. He is kind and brave, and everything a parent could hope for in a child. He's also very ill. Tyler has a rare genetic kidney disorder that requires specialized treatment. Treatment our insurance won't cover and I can no longer afford. Without it, his prognosis is grim. I never intended to reach out to you like this. Pride has kept me silent for 15 years. That, and the knowledge that you chose to believe the worst about me without ever hearing my side of the story. But this isn't about me anymore. It's about Tyler, who deserves a chance at life regardless of the mistakes his mother and grandfather have made. So here is the truth, Dad, the truth I tried to tell you that day. I didn't leave Stanford because of some scandalous relationship, as you assumed. I left because I was assaulted by Professor James Whitaker's teaching assistant, a man from a wealthy, connected family who made sure any attempt to press charges would be futile. When I discovered I was pregnant as a result of that attack, I tried to come home, to find safety and support with the one person I thought would always protect me. Instead, you jumped to conclusions. You assumed I had been reckless, irresponsible, that I was lying to cover up my mistakes. You were so concerned with scandal, with what your board members and business associates might think, that you never stopped to really look at your daughter, to see the trauma written on my face or hear the truth in my voice. When you gave me that ultimatum to end the relationship that never existed or leave your home, you left me with no choice. I couldn't abort my child, despite the circumstances of his conception, and I couldn't stay where I wasn't believed or valued. So I left. I changed my name. I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I became a nurse, working at Mercy Hospital until my illness made that impossible. I raised Tyler alone, and despite everything, we were happy. We made a good life together, Dad. A life filled with love, if not luxury. I don't write this to make you feel guilty, though I imagine guilt will be unavoidable. I write because Tyler deserves to know his grandfather, and you deserve to know the remarkable young man who carries your blood. I write because 15 years is too long for pride to stand in the way of family. And I write because, facing my own mortality, I've come to understand that forgiveness matters more than being right. The little girl who brought you this letter is Lily Parker. She volunteers at the hospital where Tyler receives dialysis and where I've been receiving treatment for stage 4 lymphoma. Somehow this extraordinary child took it upon herself to reunite our family before it's too late. If you're reading this, it means she succeeded in reaching you despite the considerable obstacles. I don't know if you'll come. I don't know if these words can bridge 15 years of silence and hurt, but I hope they might, for Tyler's sake, for mine. And maybe, just maybe, for yours too. With love, despite everything, Amanda, now Emma Wilson. Richard read the letter twice, then a third time, each word cutting deeper than the last. Emotions he'd suppressed for years crashed through him. Grief, shock, rage at the man who had hurt his daughter, and a crushing guilt that threatened to suffocate him. He became aware of Lily watching him, her young face solemn but not without compassion. This child, this stranger, had done what no one else had managed in 15 years. She had broken through the walls he'd built around his heart. "How bad is it?" he finally asked, his voice barely recognizable. "Her condition?" Lily didn't sugarcoat her answer. "The doctors say a few weeks, maybe less. She gets really tired now, and sometimes she's in pain, even with the medicine." "And Tyler, her son, my grandson." The word felt foreign on his tongue. "His kidneys are failing," Lily said matter-of-factly. "He needs dialysis 3 times a week, but what he really needs is a special treatment. Amanda, she tried to get it, but the insurance people said no, and then she got too sick to work, and..." She trailed off with a small shrug that conveyed the helplessness of their situation. Richard reached for the box again, this time examining its other contents. Medical records documented both Emma's cancer battle and Tyler's kidney disease in clinical impersonal language. Photographs showed a boy growing from infant to teenager, school portraits, birthday celebrations, candid moments that captured a life Richard had never known existed. One photo in particular stopped his breath. Tyler at about 12, standing beside a telescope, blue eyes alight with excitement as he pointed to the night sky. The resemblance to Richard's own father was uncanny, a genetic echo reaching across generations. Beneath the photographs lay newspaper clippings, stories about Professor James Whittaker's prestigious academic career, his teaching assistants, acceptance to an Ivy League law school, and years later, that same assistant's appointment to a federal judgeship. Richard's hands shook with rage as he recognized the name of the man who had assaulted his daughter and faced no consequences. The final item in the box was a small blue notebook. Richard opened it to find Amanda's handwriting, journal entries from her pregnancy. His eyes caught fragments as he turned the pages. "So afraid, but somehow already love this baby. Heard the heartbeat today. Everything changed in that moment. Wonder if Dad ever thinks of me, if he regrets. What happened?" Named him Tyler Richard Wilson. Dad will probably never know he has a namesake. Richard closed the notebook, unable to read more. He looked up to find Lily still watching him, waiting for his reaction with the patience of someone far older than 9. "Will you take me to them?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. For the first time, Lily smiled, a bright, triumphant expression that transformed her serious face. "I knew you'd come." Richard turned to his driver, who had been discreetly pretending not to hear their conversation. "Michael, cancel my appointment at the museum. Take us..." He looked to Lily. "Pine Street Apartments, Building C, Apartment 302, she supplied. "You know the address by heart?" Richard asked. Lily nodded. "I go there a lot. Emma helps me with homework when my grandma's working. And Tyler's teaching me coding." As the car pulled away from the curb, Richard tried to prepare himself for what lay ahead. 15 years of absence couldn't be undone with a single visit or apology. The damage he'd caused through his pride and refusal to listen had altered the course of multiple lives. His daughter was dying. His grandson was seriously ill, and he was a stranger to them both. "They might not want to see me," he said quietly. More to himself than to Lily. "Emma wants to see you," Lily corrected him. She wouldn't have written the letter if she didn't. And Tyler, she hesitated, Tyler is curious about you. He's seen your picture in magazines and stuff. He knows you're his grandfather, but he doesn't really understand why you've never been around. The simple assessment cut Richard to the core. How could he possibly explain to a 14-year-old boy that his absence had been based on a misunderstanding, one that could have been cleared up if he'd simply listened to his daughter all those years ago? What should I say to them? He asked, suddenly uncertain. Lily considered the question with the serious attention she seemed to give all matters. Emma says sometimes the truest thing is also the simplest. And what would that be? That you're sorry, that you were wrong. That you want to help now if they'll let you. Out of the mouths of babes, Richard thought. This child with no formal education in psychology or human relations had distilled his complex situation to its essence. The truth was simple, if painful. To admit, he had been catastrophically wrong, and no amount of wealth or power could undo the damage his pride had caused. As the Bentley navigated through Seattle's rain-drenched streets, moving from the manicured elegance of Magnolia toward the more modest neighborhoods to the south, Richard found himself studying Lily with new appreciation. "Why did you do this?" he asked. "Why go to such lengths for people who aren't even your family?" Lily looked out at the rain streaming down the window. "My grandma says that family isn't just about blood. It's about who you choose and who chooses you back." She turned to face him again. "Emma and Tyler chose me. They make me feel important. Like I matter, so I chose them back." The simple wisdom of her answer left Richard momentarily speechless. In all his years of business negotiations and strategic planning, he'd never encountered such straightforward clarity of purpose. The car slowed as they entered a neighborhood of low-rise apartment buildings, their facades weathered but dignified. This was where his daughter had made her life, not in poverty exactly, but in circumstances far removed from the privilege she'd been raised to expect. Another wave of guilt washed over him as he imagined Amanda, Emma, struggling alone. As a single mother, working to build a life without the support she deserved. "It's that one," Lily pointed, as they approached a 3-story brick building with a small, well-tended garden at its entrance. "Apartment 302. Michael pulled the car to a stop. "Would you like me to wait, sir?" Richard hesitated, then shook his head. "No, go home to your family, Michael. I'll call when I need you." As the driver nodded his understanding, Richard turned to Lily. "Are you ready?" She gave him a look that somehow managed to be both childlike and ancient. "I've been ready. The question is, are you?" With the letter in one hand and the box in the other, Richard stepped out into the rain. 15 years of separation had come down to this moment, this threshold he was about to cross. Whatever waited on the other side, forgiveness or rejection, reconciliation or a final goodbye, he would face it with the truth that had been too long unspoken. "Amanda," Richard said, his voice breaking on the name he hadn't spoken aloud in 15 years. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into infinity. In that suspended moment, father and daughter stared at each other across a chasm of time and hurt, each searching the other's face for traces of the person they'd once known. Emma was the first to speak. "I go by Emma now," she said softly. "Emma Wilson." Richard nodded, accepting this change as the first of many he would need to navigate. "Emma," he repeated, testing the unfamiliar name. Tyler moved closer to his mother's bed, his posture protective despite his obvious physical frailty. His resemblance to Richard was even more striking in person than in photographs. The same blue eyes, the same angular jaw, though softened by youth and illness. "This is Tyler," Emma said, reaching for her son's hand. "Your grandson." Richard took a tentative step into the room, still clutching the box Lily had delivered. "Hello, Tyler." The boy nodded but didn't speak, his expression a complex mixture of curiosity, wariness, and something harder to define, perhaps hope, carefully guarded against disappointment. An awkward silence descended, broken only when Lily pushed past Richard with the familiarity of someone completely at home. She went straight to Emma's bedside, her small face alight with triumph. "I told you I could do it. she announced. "I told you he would come." Emma smiled weakly, brushing a strand of damp hair from Lily's forehead. "Yes, you did. You're quite the determined messenger." Maria Parker, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. "Lily, come, we should give them privacy." "But I want to stay," Lily protested. "I want to see what happens." "Lily," Maria's voice was gentle, but firm. "This is family business now. We've done our part." Richard turned to the woman who had opened the door to him, a petite Latina with kind eyes and a dignified bearing despite her worn clothes. "Please," he said, "you don't have to leave. It seems you're more family to my daughter and grandson than I've been." Maria studied him with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen enough of life to recognize sincerity. "Perhaps we will stay a little while," she conceded. "Come, Lily. Let's make some tea for everyone." As they left the room, Richard found himself alone with the daughter he'd rejected and the grandson he'd never known. The weight of his failure pressed down on him, making it difficult to find words adequate to the moment. "You read the letter?" Emma said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Richard moved to a chair near the bed, setting the box on a small table. "Emma, he faltered, all his practiced eloquence deserting him. "I don't know where to begin." "The beginning might be good," she suggested, a trace of the spirited girl she'd once been flickering in her tired eyes. Richard nodded, gathering his courage. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. I didn't listen when you needed me most. I made assumptions that were cruel and unfair. And every day since you left has been—" He paused, struggling to maintain his composure. "Empty," he finished. "Hollow." Emma's expression remained guarded. "Why are you here now, Dad? Is it just because of what I wrote about Tyler's condition? About mine?" The question stung, but Richard knew he deserved it. "I'm here because I should have been here all along," he said. "The letter opened my eyes, yes, but not just to your situations, to my failure as a father, to 15 years of mistakes I can never fully undo." Tyler, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "You're really my grandfather, the Richard Caldwell, the one who owns Cascade Technologies." Richard turned to him, seeing in the boy's face a blend of curiosity and caution. "Yes, though I've never been much of a grandfather to you, have I?" "Mom has pictures of you," Tyler continued. "Old ones from before. She kept them in a box under her bed. I used to look at them sometimes when she was at work." Emma looked surprised. "You never told me that." Tyler shrugged. "I was curious. You didn't talk about him much, but when you did—" He glanced at Richard. "Sometimes she'd be angry, but mostly she just seemed sad." Richard felt each word like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry, Tyler. I missed everything. Your birth, your first steps, your first day of school, all of it, because I was too proud, too stubborn to admit I might have been wrong." "Mom says you thought she lied about what happened to her," Tyler said bluntly, "about the man who hurt her." Richard flinched at the directness of the statement, but nodded. "Yes, I made a terrible assumption. I refused to listen to her explanation. It's the greatest regret of my life." "But you believe her now?" "Yes," Richard said firmly, "without question." Tyler seemed to consider this, his young face serious beyond his years. "People at school sometimes talk about you, about how rich and powerful you are. They say you can make anything happen if you want it badly enough." Richard felt a chill at the implication behind the boy's words. "Tyler." "Can you make my mom better?" Tyler asked, his voice suddenly smaller, the tough exterior cracking to reveal the frightened child beneath. "Can you fix what's wrong with her?" The raw hope in the question broke something in Richard. He looked helplessly at Emma, whose eyes had filled with tears. "Tyler," she said gently, "we've talked about this. My condition is very advanced, even the best doctors—" "But he knows people," Tyler insisted. "He has money. There must be some treatment, some specialist—" "I will do everything in my power," Richard interrupted, leaning forward to meet his grandson's desperate gaze. I'll bring in the best medical teams, explore every possible option, but I can't promise—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I know," Tyler said, the brief hope fading from his face. "I just thought maybe—" Richard reached out tentatively, placing his hand on Tyler's thin shoulder. "What I can promise is this: you will never be alone. Whatever happens, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." The contact seemed to release something in Tyler. His carefully maintained composure crumbled, and suddenly he was just a frightened 14-year-old boy facing the unthinkable. Without warning, he leaned forward and buried his face against Richard's chest. Startled, Richard froze momentarily before wrapping his arms around his grandson's trembling form. Over Tyler's head, his eyes met Emma's. The wall between them wasn't gone. 15 years of separation couldn't be erased in a single conversation, but a window had opened, allowing a fragile connection to form. "He needs the Faulkner treatment protocol," Emma said quietly. "It's experimental, not covered by insurance. The specialist at Mayo Clinic said it's his best chance, but—" She left the rest unsaid. The cost had been prohibitive, the logistics impossible for a single mother fighting her own health battle. "Consider it done," Richard said without hesitation. "I'll make the arrangements tonight." Emma's expression softened slightly. "Thank you." Tyler pulled back, wiping his eyes with embarrassment. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Don't be," Richard told him. "I'm the one who should be sorry. For everything." Lily reappeared in the doorway, balancing a tray with teacups. "Is everybody okay?" she asked, her sharp eyes taking in Tyler's tear-streaked face and the emotional tension in the room. "We're getting there," Emma answered, managing a small smile. "Thank you for the tea, sweetheart." As Lily distributed cups with solemn concentration, Richard observed the easy familiarity between her and his family, the gentle way Emma thanked her, the brotherly nudge Tyler gave her when she nearly spilled his tea, the protective glance Maria cast over all of them from the doorway. These people, strangers to him, had formed a bond of care that transcended blood relation. "I've been thinking," Richard said, as Lily settled on the edge of Emma's bed, clearly having no intention of leaving the room again. "This apartment isn't ideal for recovery. There's a guest house on my property, private but close enough for medical supervision. It has a garden, plenty of space." He hesitated, aware he might be overstepping. "You would all be more comfortable there while we pursue treatment options." Emma's expression grew guarded again. "Dad, I appreciate the offer, but—" "Not just you and Tyler," Richard clarified quickly. "Lily and Maria too, if they're willing. There's more than enough room, and it seems clear that you're family to each other." Lily's eyes widened. "Really? All of us?" Maria stepped forward, her expression concerned. "Mr. Caldwell, that is very generous, but we cannot accept such charity." "It's not charity," Richard said firmly. "It's reparation for 15 years of absence, and frankly, it would be as much for me as for them. I've lost so much time already." He turned back to Emma. "Please, let me do this one thing. Let me help make what time we have left better." Emma studied him, searching for ulterior motives or conditions. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "We'll need to discuss the details. And I won't uproot Tyler's life entirely. He stays in his current school, keeps his routine as much as possible." "Of course," Richard agreed, relief washing through him. "Whatever you think is best." A subtle shift had occurred, the beginning of trust rebuilt, of fences mended. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. That would take time, and time was the one resource they couldn't count on, but it was a start. As the rain continued to fall outside, the small apartment filled with cautious conversation. Richard learned about Tyler's passion for astronomy, about Lily's dream of becoming a doctor, about Maria's journey from Guatemala 20 years earlier. He absorbed details of the life his daughter had built without him, her nursing career, her volunteer work, the small community she'd created in this modest building. For the first time in 15 years, Richard felt the hollow space inside him begin to fill. The walls he'd built around his heart, meant to protect him from pain, had only ensured his isolation. Now, as those walls crumbled, he found himself surrounded by the family he'd nearly lost forever, The daughter he'd wronged, the grandson he'd never known, and the unexpected allies who had brought them back together. Later, as Emma's strength began to fade and her eyelids grew heavy, Richard rose to leave. "I'll send a car in the morning," he said, "and I'll have my assistant arrange for medical transport." Emma nodded, too tired for further discussion. "Thank you," she whispered. Tyler walked Richard to the door, his initial wariness replaced by cautious hope. "You'll really come back tomorrow, you promise?" Richard placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder, the gesture already feeling more natural. "I promise. Nothing could keep me away." As he stepped into the hallway, Lily followed him. "I told you she'd want to see you," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. Richard looked down at this remarkable child who had accomplished what seemed impossible. "How did you know?" Lily shrugged. "Because she's your daughter, and no matter what happened, she never stopped loving you. That's what family means." With those simple words echoing in his mind, Richard Caldwell stepped back into the rain, not as the isolated billionaire he'd been that morning, but as a father and grandfather with a second chance he'd never expected, and knew he didn't deserve. Behind him, in the modest apartment he was leaving, lay a broken family beginning to heal. Ahead of him stretched a future suddenly filled with both urgency and purpose. 15 years of separation had ended, but the real work of reconciliation was just beginning. 6 months later, Seattle's summer arrived with unprecedented brilliance, as if the weather itself was celebrating the transformations that had taken place at Evergreen Manor. The property's guest house, once a seldom-used retreat for business associates, had become a vibrant center of activity and healing. Richard stood on the main house's terrace, watching as Tyler guided Lily through the garden, pointing out the constellations mapped in the stone pathway they'd designed together. The two had become inseparable, a friendship forged in shared experiences that children their age shouldn't have had to face, but that had given them wisdom beyond their years. "They're quite the pair, aren't they?" Emma's voice came from behind. Him, soft but stronger than it had been in months. Richard turned, still marveling at the sight of his daughter, pale but upright, moving without the wheelchair that had been necessary during those first difficult weeks. The experimental immunotherapy treatment they'd found after exhaustive research and countless consultations had done what conventional medicine couldn't. It had slowed the cancer's progression, giving Emma precious time that once seemed impossible. Thick. "Fair's thieves," Richard agreed, offering his arm as Emma joined him at the railing. Tyler was explaining the difference between red giants and white dwarfs to her yesterday. I'm not sure how much she understood, but she was certainly pretending to be fascinated. Emma smiled. "She doesn't have to pretend. Lily absorbs everything. Tyler teaches her. Her science teacher told Maria she's suddenly become the star pupil." "Speaking of Maria," Richard said, "did she like the sewing room we set up in the East Wing?" "She cried," Emma reported. "Said she'd never seen so many types of fabric in one place. I think she's planning to start a small alterations business from home now that she doesn't have to work 3 jobs anymore." Richard nodded, satisfaction warming him. The arrangement he'd initially proposed as temporary had evolved into something more permanent, more familial. The guest house, with its multiple bedrooms and accessible design, had become home to Emma, Tyler, Lily, and Maria, a found family brought together by circumstances none could have predicted. The journey hadn't been easy. Those first weeks had been filled with medical crises, midnight ambulance calls, and the stomach-dropping fear that they'd found each other too late. Tyler's condition had worsened before the specialized treatment at Mayo Clinic began to reverse his kidney deterioration. Emma had fought through brutal side effects from the experimental protocol that represented her best hope. There had been days when the weight of possible loss had seemed unbearable, but there had also been moments of unexpected joy. Tyler's fascination with Richard's collection of antique telescopes, Lily's discovery of the Manor's library, and her determination to read every book on its shelves, Maria's transformation of the guest house kitchen into a warm hub of family, meals and laughter, and most precious of all, the long conversations between Richard and Emma, painful at first, then increasingly healing as they worked through 15 years of misunderstandings and hurt. Dr. Matthews called with my latest results, Emma said, her voice carefully neutral. Richard tensed, turning to study her face. And a smile broke across her features. Significant reduction in tumor size. He's actually using the word remission as a possibility, not just a distant hope. The relief that flooded through Richard made his knees weak. He pulled Emma into a gentle embrace, mindful of her still fragile state. That's everything. Emma returned the hug, resting her head against his shoulder. Not everything, she corrected softly. But it's a start. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as Tyler now led Lily to the small observatory. Richard had built at the property's edge, a 16th birthday gift that had brought his grandson to tears of disbelief and joy. "I've been thinking," Richard said after a while. A dangerous pastime, Emma teased, the playful tone reminiscent of the daughter he'd lost and was gradually finding again. "I want to establish a foundation," he continued, "for victims of assault who aren't believed, who don't have the resources to fight back, who face what you faced but without support." Emma pulled back slightly to look at him. "Dad, it would provide legal assistance, medical care, counseling, whatever they need," Richard pressed on. "And it would be named for you, the Amanda Wilson Foundation." He paused. "Unless you'd prefer Emma?" "I'm still getting used to the change." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Amanda," she said softly. "For the foundation, I'd like it to be Amanda. That's who I was when it happened, who wasn't believed." Richard nodded, throat tight with emotion. "Amanda it is." "And I want to help." "Run it," Emma added. "When I'm stronger. My nursing background could be useful, and I understand what these women and men are going through." "I was hoping you'd say that," Richard admitted. "I've already had the lawyers draw up preliminary paperwork whenever you're ready." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the immaculate lawn. From the guest house they could hear Maria calling the children for dinner, her accented voice carrying on the evening breeze. "We should join them," Emma said. "Tyler made a special dessert to celebrate my scan results." As they walked together toward the guest house, Richard reflected on how completely his life had changed in 6 months. The empty mansion that had once echoed with his solitary footsteps now buzzed with the energy of family. Rooms that had been preserved like museum exhibits were now alive with use. The music room where Tyler practiced piano, the sunroom where Emma read during her recovery, the kitchen where Maria created meals that brought them all together at the end of each day. Most transformative of all had been the presence of Lily Parker, the determined child who had broken through his defenses, with nothing but a cardboard box and an unshakable belief in the power of truth. Richard had formally established a college fund for her, but his real gift had been the family she'd gained, the father figure she'd never had in him, the siblings she'd found in Tyler and Emma, the stability her grandmother had always struggled to provide alone. Inside the guest house, the scene that greeted them was one of simple domestic harmony. Tyler, looking healthier than he had in years, was setting the table while arguing good-naturedly with Lily about the merits of different Star Wars films. Maria moved between the kitchen and dining area, carrying dishes that filled the space with mouth-watering aromas, and in the corner, a small Christmas tree stood despite the summer season, a celebration of the 6-month anniversary of their reunion, decorated with ornaments they'd each selected to represent their journey. "Finally," Tyler exclaimed when he saw them, "we were about to start without you. Lily's been eyeing the chocolate soufflé for the past 20 minutes. "I have not," Lily protested, though her guilty expression suggested otherwise. "Wash up." "Everyone," Maria instructed, the authority in her voice brooking no argument even from Richard Caldwell, one of Seattle's most powerful men. As they gathered around the table, a family created through pain, chance, and ultimately choice, Richard found himself offering a silent prayer of gratitude. For the daughter he'd nearly lost forever, for the grandson who was thriving under the specialized care they'd found, for Maria's wisdom and Lily's determination, for second chances he knew he didn't deserve but had been granted anyway. The meal progressed with the comfortable rhythm they'd established over months of shared dinners. Tyler described his latest telescope observations. Lily recounted a playground victory against boys who'd underestimated her soccer skills. Maria discussed plans for her new business, while Emma shared encouraging words from her medical team. When dessert was served, Tyler's ambitious chocolate, soufflé slightly collapsed but enthusiastically praised, Richard cleared his throat. "I have an announcement," he said, drawing their attention. "I've made some decisions about Cascade Technologies." Emma looked surprised. "Dad, we don't need to discuss business at dinner." "This isn't just business," Richard countered. "It's about legacy, about the future." He turned to Tyler. "Your future, specifically." Tyler's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Mine?" Richard nodded. "I've restructured the company's succession plan, started the process of creating a position for you. Not for now, of course. You have school to finish, college to attend, your own dreams to pursue. But when and if you're ready, there will be a place for you at Cascade." Tyler's eyes widened. "But I'm not. I don't even have your last name." "Names are just labels," Richard said, echoing wisdom Lily had once shared with him. "Family is about more than that. It's about who you choose and who chooses you back." He glanced at Lily, who beamed at hearing her words repeated. "But if the name matters to you, if you ever want to be Tyler Wilson Caldwell or Tyler Caldwell, that option is yours. No pressure, no expectations, just a door that's open if you ever want to walk through it." The room fell silent as Tyler processed this information. Emma watched her son carefully, her expression a mix of pride and protectiveness. "I'd like to learn about the company," Tyler finally said. "Not to take over or anything, but to understand what you built, what might have been Mom's if things had been different." "Still could be," Richard said, turning to Emma. "The offer extends to you too, in whatever capacity interests you, whenever you're ready." Emma looked thoughtful. "Between the foundation and my medical treatments, I'm not sure I have the bandwidth right now, but ask me again in a year." "I'll pencil it into my calendar," Richard promised with a smile. Later that evening, after dishes had been cleared and the younger members of the household had retreated to their rooms, Richard found himself sitting on the guest house porch with Maria. They'd developed an unlikely friendship over the months, built on their shared commitment to the unconventional family now under their care. "You've done a good thing," Maria said, her accented English soft in the summer twilight, "giving them security, a future." "They've given me far more," Richard replied honestly. "A second chance I didn't deserve." Maria shook her head. "Deserve has nothing to do with it. Love isn't earned, Mr. Caldwell. It's given. That's what makes it precious." The simple wisdom of her words struck Richard deeply. For most of his life, he'd operated on the principle that everything had to be earned. Success, respect, even affection. The past 6 months had taught him otherwise. Lily's inexplicable devotion to a family not her own. Tyler's willingness to know the grandfather who had rejected his mother. Emma's capacity for forgiveness despite years of abandonment. None of it was deserved. All of it was freely given. "I've been thinking about the East Wing renovation," Richard said, changing the subject before emotion overwhelmed him. "If you're going to establish your sewing business there, we should probably install better lighting, maybe expand the storage space." Maria gave him a knowing look, aware of his deflection but allowing it. "That would be lovely, but you've done so much already." "It makes me happy," Richard said simply, "having all of you here, making this place a home again." As he spoke, his gaze drifted to the main house, imposing, elegant and for too many years, empty of everything that mattered. Now, with the guest house filled with life and laughter, the contrast was striking. He'd lived in a mausoleum of his own making, surrounded by wealth, but impoverished in all the ways that counted. Inside, the sound of Tyler's laughter drifted through an open window, followed by Lily's indignant response to whatever he'd said. Emma's gentler tones mediated between them, the ordinary sounds of family, of belonging, that Richard had lived without for too long. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. Emma's health remained precarious despite the promising results. Tyler's treatment required ongoing monitoring and adjustment. The foundation Richard had proposed would face logistical and legal hurdles. Life would continue to be complicated, messy, and at times difficult. But it would also be rich with purpose and connection. The broken chains of the past had been reforged into something new, not perfect, but strong enough to bind them together despite the wounds they'd each carried. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Richard Caldwell understood with perfect clarity what had eluded him for 62 years. True wealth had nothing to do with the fortune he'd amassed or the power he'd wielded. It lived in the reconciliation he'd never thought possible, in the family he'd nearly lost forever, and in the extraordinary chain of events set in motion by a determined child with a cardboard box on a rainy Seattle afternoon. In the end, it wasn't his money or influence that had saved what mattered most. It was something far simpler and infinitely more powerful: the courage to face the truth, the humility to admit mistakes, and the capacity for forgiveness that resided in the heart of the daughter he'd failed but found again. As if reading his thoughts, Maria patted his hand gently. "It is never too late to begin again, Mr. Caldwell. Never too late for miracles." And looking at the home they'd created from the fragments of broken lives, Richard could only agree. Some might call it chance or coincidence that had brought them together. But he knew better. What had saved them all was nothing less than the purest miracle of all, the miracle of love freely given, with no expectation of return. Dear listeners, we hope that Richard and Emma's journey of reconciliation has touched your hearts. Their story reminds us that it's never too late for second chances, and that sometimes the most unexpected messengers, like young Lily, can change our lives forever. If you've enjoyed this emotional tale of forgiveness and family, we've prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories that explore the complexities of human relationships. You'll find it by clicking the link to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if Richard and Emma's story resonated with you. We bring you unique, heartfelt narratives every day that remind us of our shared humanity and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. What moment in their journey touched you most deeply? Was it Richard reading Emma's letter, their emotional reunion, or perhaps Lily's determination to bring a family back together? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and love connecting with you through these stories. Until our next tale of hope and redemption, thank you for listening.